Hello and welcome. I'm Vijay Srinivas, and I'm quite delighted. Along with me is also our editor-in-chief, Mr. Srinivasan there, in this special interview with former IMF India representative Josh Felman. Josh, thanks so much for your time.
No, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. So let me begin with this. $12 billion tax cuts. The budget has been largely hailed as a budget for the middle class. It's been tailor-made for the middle class. How do you sort of read the Indian Union budget 2025?
That's a rather large question. Of course, I would agree that it is a budget for the middle class. There's no doubt about that. But you need to really assess the budget against a set of criteria, right? And the criteria I would propose is this. One, what does the budget do to ensure macro stability? And two, what does it do to promote growth? Right? Because we need both. We want the economy to be stable, and we also want it to grow. So I would propose beyond this sort of I don't know what the right word is, but common, let's put it this way, standard analysis that yes, this is a budget for the middle class. I would propose assessing the budget against those two criteria.
Yeah. Okay. So if you had to look at from macro stability aspect, the fiscal deficit has been bang on target. In fact, she managed to do at 4.8, and for the next year, for the current year, she is even budgeted 4.4% of GDP. And in a way, it shows that the fiscal consolidation path, which she has promised as per FRBM Act, she is on course towards that. She is also saying in the budget there is 14.8 trillion borrowing, which means there is enough liquidity in the for lending. And the step of basically one of the problems which the economy was facing was on the consumption side. So the hope is by giving a 1 lakh crore tax cut to middle class, it will be able to revive the economy, because the expectation is about 60 to 70,000 crore rupees will be available, which will be able to kind of restart the economy. How do you see this? Do you think these steps not enough, and there is the fiscal stability is not is not what it is? How do you see this?
Obviously, it's a very good thing that they've managed to wind back the budget deficit, as you pointed out, both in this fiscal year and also a further winding back in next fiscal year. The question that I have about the budget, and let me be very, very clear, this government has shown a remarkable determination to hit the budget deficit targets. Aside from the pandemic period, where obviously they weren't too fussed about exactly what deficits they were running, every year, whenever they announce something, at the end of the year, they tend to hit it. And I would also note that in particular, in the past few years, one of the ways that they've managed to ensure that they hit the budget deficit target is they have relatively conservative revenue forecasts. And then when revenue has outperformed, then it becomes relatively easy to hit the target and even to outperform. This year, though, I notice a bit of a change, that the revenue targets are, let's put it this way, a little bit ambitious. So if you if you look at the personal income tax, for example, personal income tax is forecast to grow at 14.4%, much higher than the nominal GDP growth of 10%. And yes, it is true that in previous years, income tax has been growing faster than GDP. That's absolutely true. But this is largely because people have been paying capital gains tax. And it's very, very difficult to have confidence that over the coming year, the stock market is going to rise the same way that it has been rising in previous years. And therefore, the capital gains tax will be there to boost the tax receipts. It's much more likely that probably the growth in incomes will come mainly from wages and salaries, and that will probably grow as usual around the same rate as GDP. That's point one. And then point two is, of course, on top you have the income tax cut. So it's a little bit difficult to see how personal income tax is going to grow so rapidly over the coming year. Now, also related to this, there's a fairly optimistic assumption about corporate income tax. So there's a risk. I just want to point out, I don't think a risk that the budget deficit is going to be overrun, but a risk that it's going to be very different from last few years, that in order to hit the budget deficit, they're going to have to compress expenditure. And so what expenditure are we talking about? In the end, really, the only expenditure that they would be able to compress outside a budget would be CapEx. They can slow CapEx down, right? Now, one of the things that people have pointed out in this budget is there is no huge increase in CapEx, even in the budget. So if you have a risk that revenues are going to fall short, then that also means that there's a risk that CapEx is actually going to decline. And so that's one of the risks that I see with this budget. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, okay. I think even as we look at that, I think even the expenditure they have kind of underestimated. They haven't. So if the revenue is overestimated, the expenditure has been kept more or less at the same level. Like you said, and then last year for the first time, I think direct taxes were more than indirect taxes.
Yes.
And they expect that to achieve this year. Now, but I want to go to the second part of the question which I asked, that this tax break which he has given to the middle class, which will impact nearly 1 crore tax-paying population, that's what is expected. What kind of effect it might have on the economy? You think it won't help pick up consumption, or there will be a lag, or when it will kick in, and what kind of multiplier effect it might have? I mean, those are the expectations.
Of course, the truthful answer is we don't know, right? But since we have to guess, since you're asking me to guess, right. My guess is that a lot of this tax cut is going to be saved. Mm-hmm. If you look at other countries that have had tax cuts, you see that quite often the tax cuts are not spent; they're actually saved. Now, why would they be saved rather than spent? Well, because if you kind of put yourself in the shoes of a middle-class family having a sort of discussion around the dinner table about what to do with the extra 10,000 rupees they get a month because the taxes have been cut, or whatever the number is, and whether they should spend it. It's possible that the discussion would go something like this, that I hear first, over the past few years, we've been able to supplement our spending because the stock market has been doing very, very well. But lately the stock market has not been doing well. So that makes me a little bit nervous about spending. And then they see also that they hear the economy has been slowing down, and that reinforces their nervousness. And then finally, of course, they hear stories about people not being able to get jobs. So, you know, they come to the conclusion after this discussion that maybe now is really not the right time to go out and spend. And I suspect that many middle-class households are going to be having this discussion.
Okay, so if I were to take your read your, I mean, if what you said is what we can only guess right now. If this guess of yours, and if I had to see earlier, the investment hasn't kicked in because the corporate cuts which is given to the companies, even they haven't managed to pass it on, in the sense that they haven't, because there are excess capacity perhaps already. So they haven't invested. In this scenario, where do you see the economy heading? Because this was the linchpin on which, one of the linchpin on which the FM had, pivoted her budget, hoping that the middle class would respond.
Right. So, if there's one number that I'd want to emphasize, it is the number 4.8. And by 4.8, I'm not referring to the budget deficit.
Okay.
I'm referring to, well, let me step back before I even give the number. The big question that everyone has to sort out in their minds is, what is the potential growth rate of the Indian economy, right? If we believe that the potential growth rate is 8, 10%, then what's been going on lately is just a sort of lull, and soon enough the economy will sort of get back and grow rapidly again, right? But what happens if the potential growth rate is not 8, 10%? Well, at least under the current set of policy settings, right? In that case, things look very different. And the number that I mentioned earlier is actually the average growth number since 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Since 2019, the average growth rate of the Indian economy has only been 4.8%. Now, that doesn't prove anything. Of course, it was a very special period. First, there was the contraction under COVID, and then after that, the big expansion. But it does raise a question, right? What happens if the potential growth rate of the Indian economy is only around 5%? And in that case, you come to a very, very different way of thinking about things, namely that something needs to be done in order to increase. Some deep changes need to be made, some structural reforms need to be made to the economy to make it grow much faster, to make India achieve the 8 to 10% that we wanted to achieve.
But how do we do it? That's on Moody's hand there. That's the question.
Okay, so you can roughly separate things out into the strategy under Modi 1.0 and the strategy under Modi 2.0, right? Now, the strategy under Modi 1.0 was let's do all these structural reforms that economists were recommending. And also let's clamp down on corruption. And between the two of them, the economy should take off. But it didn't, right? So then in Modi 2.0, he shifted to a different strategy. The strategy, I would give it a certain name. The government has not named it, of course. But my name would be the China strategy. What is the government's definition of the China strategy? The government's definition, their sort of understanding of what China did, is China built a lot of infrastructure, and it also offered incentives to firms to come and put their industries in the country. So that's what they did. The government in the budget doubled capex as a percent of GDP, and it introduced this PLI scheme to encourage firms to set up plans to invest in India, to make in India. That strategy, of course, obviously it's built up infrastructure, but it hasn't, even that hasn't delivered the growth. As I pointed out, over the past 5 years, really growth has only been around 5%. So now one of the things that I was looking for in this budget is some sense of what the growth strategy is going to be under Modi 3.0. Now, you could, there are various avenues that they could take, right? They could take the avenue of saying, well, let's just wait. The strategy will pay off. You just be patient, please. Give it more time. That's one possible approach. Another approach is to say, well, our strategy is correct, but we need to push it a bit harder. So really accelerate the infrastructure spending, really accelerate the PLI, right? Or you could take third road, which is, okay, time for a different strategy, right? So 3 options. And I was waiting to see which one of these options they chose in the budget. And it's not very clear what strategy they've chosen. Clearly, it doesn't seem to be strategy number 2. They haven't. There's no big infra push in this budget. The PLI wasn't really mentioned in the budget speech. So okay, so it looks like they ruled out option 2. For option 3, they did say something in the budget about deregulation.
That's right, exactly.
Right? We don't know what that entails. It could be something big. It could be something really useful. we just don't know. But on the other hand, of course, it could be they set up a committee, and we know, many times you have a committee, they come up with very elaborate plans, and absolutely nothing is done. And there I would point to, for example, a few years back, the Disinvestment Committee, which came up with very elaborate plans for disinvestment, and then
No, here I would like to interject. You said there could be three options. The number one, you said that they could just wait and see. Is it a combination of option 1 and 3 that they want to wait and see, and then they just left a little hint about deregulation and didn't elaborate? We don't know what it is, but probably they want external situation to clarify after the arrival of Trump and the Trump tariff. It's a very volatile external situation. Maybe wait and a combination of 1 and 3. How do you look at it?
It's a very good point, very good question. All of the questions have been good, of course. I don't know. It looks to me, it looks to me very much as you said, like Modi 3.0 is still sort of waiting. It looks mainly like option 1, right? That the wait and see, and see how things develop. Maybe the economy will pick up on its own. Maybe the tax cut will really revive consumer spending. Maybe potential growth rate is 8%. So let's just wait. Let's just wait and see. And in the meantime, we can study deregulation so that we have it in case we need it. I would guess really that's probably what they're thinking. But you raised another sort of tangential point, or maybe central point, which is that the external environment has become a lot more volatile. So the government needs to make some plans, contingency plans. Mm-hmm. Now, how would I think about this situation if I were sitting in the government? I think first, as always, there is some opportunity, and in some respects, India is better placed than most other countries, because India relies much more heavily on export of services. And exports of services will not be directly affected by Trump tariffs. And indeed, they might actually benefit, because if you think about it, everything major that you buy, even if it looks like a physical object, like a car or a cell phone, it has two components to it. One is the physical object, but embedded in that object is a whole bunch of services, right? Cars nowadays are basically computers on wheels, and so are cell phones. So it's quite possible that people, if there are impediments placed on the export of goods, people will try to get around it by making it much more about services. Instead of shipping a good, you ship the service, is what I'm saying. India might benefit. And the other way that India might benefit is that to the extent that, say, high tariffs are placed on China, then maybe India can grab market, and tariffs are not placed on India, then India can grab market share. right? So you also, you have to think not just of the threats in any given situation, but also the opportunities. That having been said, obviously there are threats, right? So then you have to start thinking about how you deal with these threats. And the key way to deal with the threats, very clearly in my mind, is, okay, you need to become less reliant on the US market, right?
Yeah.
Now, again, to a certain extent, India is well placed because a lot of the goods exports are commodities, which can be sold to any country. Steel can be sold anywhere, aluminum can be sold anywhere. But obviously some things are, like pharmaceuticals, engineering products. You'd have to find different customers. And the most obvious place to find these customers would be Europe and the UK, right? Now, so that then brings us to free trade agreements. India has been negotiating free trade agreements with the UK and even the EU for quite some time, and so it's going to need to refocus on seeing whether maybe those FTAs can be brought to fruition.
Yeah. Before we go to next question, I just want to again go back to the 4.8, which you said that you didn't complete, that mystery figure. Are you estimating that the growth would be around 4.8? See, what happened is in Q1, and if you see the Q2 results have been pretty bad last year. And current year actually, because the new year will come from April 1st. So the Q2 has been pretty bad, and to be fair, they've been conservative in estimating next year's growth also. Though the requirement and the talk politically is 8% to be major power, 8 to 10% kind of growth. But the estimation, if you see, is only between 6.3 and 6.8. So the government itself has been pretty conservative about its target. And can you explain this 4.8? Yeah.
Yes, 4.8 is the average growth since fiscal 20. That's the average growth of the Indian economy. And so, it's, as I said, those years were a little bit distorted, first by the pandemic and then the big rebound. But one has to ask the question, what happens if potential really is only around 5? Now, so that's what I was trying to say. That's what I was trying to say earlier. One of the things that has sort of worried me a little bit, and I don't think has been commented on enough in the media, is that over the past few years, since 2022, particularly in 2022, 2023, the economy benefited from what I call the GCC boom. So in 2022, there was a huge increase in service exports that was entirely due to GCCs. So many people got excellent jobs at GCCs as companies implemented their post-pandemic plans and decided to outsource a tremendous amount of services to India. so these people who managed to get dream jobs at GCCs then turned around and they used this money to buy flats and to buy SUVs. And so in 2023, in the beginning of 2024, there was this huge boom in construction and in SUV sales and in credit. And what you saw toward the end of last year was the inevitable end of this boom. Because once these people who had got jobs in 2022 had got their flats, had furnished the flats, had bought their SUVs, then they were done. They didn't need to spend, obviously small amounts of spending, but the big expenditures were done. So you saw a slowdown in construction, slowdown in SUV sales, slowdown in credit, and that's reflected in the GDP numbers. So it's not really, the way I look at it, it's not really that something temporary happened over the past few quarters that caused the economy to slow down. It's more that something temporary happened a few years ago that caused the economy to speed up. And now we're returning to a much more normal rate. Unless, of course, you can get investment started, or you can get another burst in exports of some kind.
Since you brought up the topic of GCCs there, so India's manufacturing has been stagnant for a very long time. Not today, not yesterday. There, the services has been doing pretty well, and there's including Mr. Raghuram Rajan, the economist, the former RBI governor, says India has got a lot of room to maneuver, but in the services sector rather than focusing on the manufacturing. I mean, do you think India shouldn't go the China way? Because China is quite big, the manufacturing hub of the world. India can actually be the services hub of the world, isn't it?
Of course it can. There are really two questions, right? First, how much scope is there to push services exports? What's really the potential, say, for GCCs? And I have zero idea about the answer to this question. I've never seen any good analysis. It's possible, right? One thing, but it's linked to the other problem, which is what about on the supply side? So in order for India to become a true services superpower, India needs to have the talent in much larger numbers than it does today, and getting that talent would require education reforms, which I haven't seen happening, right? Going down all the way to the primary schools. And without that, there's also this risk that you're leaving a lot of people out. So for example, I mean, what we've seen in the economy is some people with the requisite education have done really, really well over the past few years. The GCCs have taken off people at the top, and that's forced up salaries all the way along for every talent, well-educated Indian, and that's been great for, say, people like us, right? But for other people who don't have the education to get these kind of IT jobs, life has been much tougher in recent years.
Yeah, sure.
And you can't get these people into the good jobs until you get them that education. That's the
So you're
problem.
saying, yeah, need to get the education right. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just have one question. I have kind of gone through your 2019 paper,
Yes.
you and Arvind Subramanian,
Right.
where you actually spoken of not twin but four kind of balance sheet problems. But what I want to ask you is that there you have argued for 1991 kind of reforms. But if you
Yes.
look at the current situation, do you think, because from the looks of it, even government isn't pretty conservative. They are only thinking about 6%, 6.2, 6.3. You seem to suggest that somewhere it will be around 5 within the average. That's what you are indicating. But this kind of reforms, 1991, you see the reform movement is to push a greater growth of 88% and above, or to prevent or to avoid a crisis?
No, I don't think that India is facing any crisis, but to meet the aspirations of people, it is important that the economy grows very rapidly, and I think pretty much everyone has agreed that rapidly, although say 5-6%, whatever it is. On paper sounds like a good number. It is higher than many other countries, right? But it's not really what people have in mind. It's not. Everyone has in mind what China did, where for several decades it grew at 10% year in, year out. That's what people really want. That transformation within one generation that occurred in China, and it's my feeling that a whole lot needs to be done in order to get to where we want to be. And my fear, and it's only a fear, it's not a prediction. My fear is that if nothing changes, India may be stuck at 5%.
That's right. The RBI MPC meet is around the corner, and the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman is still going to the fiscal consolidation path, as she said in the budget. There is a substantial amount of liquidity that's coming in, injected in the RBI. So, and if you look at the cash reserve ratio, which was 4.5% in December, was reduced to 4% there. So, I mean, are we here to anticipate for rate cut this session? And that's A. And B, are we moving towards some kind of a slow, sort of rate cutting cycle?
Well, I mean, it's that question is better directed at investment bank economists whose job it is to make these predictions. But what I would say is that since 2022, the RBI has been very concerned to maintain a stable rupee against the dollar. So there's a little bit of a tension in monetary policy right now. It's kind of three-way tension. The RBI would like to keep the rupee stable against the dollar. The RBI, obviously, inflation is a little bit higher than the RBI feels comfortable with. And at the same time, the RBI is a bit worried about growth. So it needs to kind of find a balance here. And one of the interesting things that we will discover that I would be looking for, let's put it this way, in the upcoming MPC meet is how they think this will all resolve. Where do they think the appropriate balance is? And of course, it's particularly important because this is the first meeting of the new governor. So obviously, he will have his own ideas about where to strike this balance.
Okay. So I have one final question.
Yes.
If you have to look at from what you have said so far, if you have to arrive at some kind of a conclusion, if wait and watch is the kind of policy as Modi government is doing as of now in the financial sector, and deregulation as a hint, which could be, do you see that could be the reform movement? Because budget need not be the end and all for everything. They can do other things also beyond budget. So, because there is an aspirational class which wants a higher growth, and therefore we should expect, or we can expect, some kind of a reform movement, because the deregulation is not yet specified. External sector is not very clear. Therefore, if wait and watch is a policy, can we summarize from after a conversation with you, this is what the approach could be?
I think it's clearly something that, well, the short answer is yes, right? It could be, right? It's clearly something they're considering. They do, always, right? You have a base case, and then you have contingency plans, right? Maybe their base case is the economy picks up, Trump tariffs are not really a problem, and everything is fine. But then you have to have contingency plans in case these things are not true. That potential growth, if it turns out potential growth is much less than people think, if it turns out that India needs to do something to deal with Trump tariffs. So I'm sure they're preparing these contingency plans, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Josh, on that note. So no less riveting talking to you there. And apparently Trump and Modi are all set to meet on February 13th. That's the update we're getting from the Indian media there. So let's see how it goes.
Right. One, you can say many things about India, but one thing you can never say is that India is boring. India is always exciting. Things are always exciting.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.